The Langford estate shimmered like a mirage in the soft light of the setting sun. Nestled at the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, it was a majestic blend of old-world charm and modern elegance. Stone verandas draped in wisteria, glass conservatories glowing with candlelight, and sculpted gardens stretching into the horizon. Tonight, it was the glittering stage for one of the season's most exclusive gatherings, the Grace Gold Benefit Gala, hosted by media tycoon and reclusive billionaire Graham Langford. A procession of limousines and vintage roadsters curved up the long drive, their passengers stepping out into a world of velvet ropes, laughter, and flashbulbs. Champagne shimmered in crystal flutes, and violins sang through the warm night air. Inside the lantern-lit ballroom, conversation rose and fell in elegant waves. Everyone was waiting for Graham. He was the name whispered behind manicured hands, widely admired, intensely private, impossibly wealthy, and still single. But Graham hadn't arrived. In the rear of the ballroom, hidden behind a column of peonies and twisted eucalyptus, was Maya Brooks. Her charcoal apron was smudged with soil and streaks of floral tape, her deep brown skin glowing from the gentle effort of her work. Her natural coils were tied up with a paisley scarf, and her eyes scanned the arch she'd just finished dressing with ivory roses and clematis vines. Maya was just a stand-in. A friend at her small floral studio had called out last minute. She agreed to help, just for the setup. She wasn't supposed to stay. But just as she gathered her tote to leave, the staff sealed the main doors, guests only. Security mistook her for part of the waitstaff, and Maya, ever the peacekeeper, simply nodded and tucked herself into a shadowed corner near the side exit. The room transformed around her. Sequins glinted, heels clicked, and laughter floated like perfume. Women with gloved hands and diamonds circled like moths, their eyes on the man of the hour. And when Graham finally entered, tall and striking in a tailored black tux and crisp white shirt, the crowd swayed toward him like flowers leaning into sunlight. "Graham, darling," purred Celeste Renner, the heiress draped in lavender chiffon. "Come, I saved you a drink." He smiled, effortlessly polite but distant. "Mr. Langford," cooed Elise Duval, her golden dress whispering against the marble, "you're impossible to catch." He nodded, slipping between conversations with the practiced grace of someone used to being admired but never truly known. The truth was, he couldn't stand these parties. The charity mattered, of course, but the spectacle, the flattery. It felt empty. Then he saw her. A flicker of movement near the edge of the ballroom. Someone real, not wrapped in artifice. Maya tried to make herself smaller, thinking maybe she'd wait for a lull before quietly leaving. But Graham paused. His gaze didn't flit past her. It stayed. She wasn't trying to be seen, and that somehow made her unforgettable. He believed deeply in giving back, in funding literacy programs, clean water initiatives, community clinics. But the pretense, the thinly veiled ambition in every compliment, the hollow praise, the people who laughed too loudly at jokes he hadn't finished, that part drained him. And then he saw her. Tucked behind a towering bird of paradise and two vases bursting with sunburst lilies, and freesia sat a young woman in a simple white blouse. Her apron, creased and carefully folded, rested beside her. She was tucking a fallen stem back into place with quiet precision, like the chaos of the world had narrowed into that single act of care. Her skin glowed in the candlelight, her expression unguarded, her presence unbothered by the noise. She looked like stillness in a room full of performance. Before he knew it, Graham's feet were moving. "You missed one," he said, voice low and unexpected, nodding toward a lone sunflower petal on the floor. Maya looked up quickly, her eyes wide, then softened into a kind smile. "Oh, I didn't see you there." He crouched beside her, picking up the petal and holding it out. Their fingers touched, brief, warm. "Here." "Thank you," she said, brushing her hands off on her lap. "I was hoping no one would notice me back here. I'm just the help." Graham tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You're not just anything." Maya gave a small laugh. Not performative, not demure, just real. It wrapped around his ribs like a ribbon. "I'm Maya. I'm with Magnolia Moss Floral. I wasn't even supposed to be here tonight. Filled in last minute. Thought I'd be gone before the champagne came out. I'm Graham, he said, though he knew he didn't need to. Everyone here knew who he was. I figured, she said with a shrug. You've got that whole, I threw this party, but I'd rather be in sweatpants watching a documentary look. He chuckled, a real rough-edged laugh that surprised even him. That obvious? Only to people who feel the same, she said, her voice soft but certain. Time bent for a few minutes. The violins, the chatter, the clinking glass. It all blurred into background as they talked, about flowers and books, about how Maya ran a tiny rooftop garden program for teens in her neighborhood, about how digging in the dirt with them felt more honest than most conversations she had in a day. Graham told her how he started coding in his dad's garage at 13, how he built his first news aggregator before he could legally drink, how lately the boardrooms and IPOs and gala speeches made him feel like he was performing a version of himself he didn't entirely recognize. You're not what I expected, he said, almost to himself. I get that a lot, Maya replied, tucking a curl behind her ear. He was just about to ask if she wanted to sneak out for some air, maybe to the gardens where it was quiet, when a waiter appeared, flustered, tray balanced awkwardly on one hand. Mr. Langford, sir. The senator's asking for you. Graham hesitated, his eyes flicking back to Maya. Will you still be here? She gave him a soft, knowing smile. Depends how long you take. Something in that smile, no calculation, no flattery, just truth, made his pulse catch. For the first time all night, he didn't feel like he was at his own party. He felt present. He nodded once and stepped away, but not without one last glance over his shoulder. Maya watched him go, then turned her attention back to the bouquet, and smiled. I doubt it. I've overstayed already. Before he could say anything else, Maya was on her feet. She slipped her apron under one arm, gave him a soft, almost apologetic smile, and slipped through the side exit, the door clicking quietly behind her. Back in the ballroom, the music swelled, laughter rose, and the chandeliers gleamed like stars. A champagne flute materialized in Graham's hand, pressed there by someone he didn't see. Getting cozy with the help, Langford? Came the sugar-laced drawl of Celeste Renner, her fingers curling into the crook of his arm like ivy. How charming. He didn't respond. His eyes were still on the door Maya had disappeared through, her name echoing in his chest like a skipped heartbeat. Later that night, the guests gone and the last of the crystal polished and packed away, Graham found himself alone in the courtyard. The moonlight painted the marble path in silver, casting soft shadows over the floral arch she'd tended with such care. She was gone, no last name, no number, just Maya. But her laugh still lingered in the air, and the gentle way she'd handled the flowers haunted him more than anything the society darlings had said all night. He'd met models, heiresses, women with degrees and dynasties, but the woman in the white blouse and lilac apron had smiled at him like she knew him, the real him, like maybe he was more than just a headline and a fortune. And now? He had no idea how to find her, but he would. Monday, 8:42 a.m. The Langford Tower boardroom was a sleek box of glass and steel perched 40 stories above the city. The table was cluttered with earnings reports, investor slide decks and glowing tablets filled with forecasts. Graham couldn't focus on any of it. Q3 projections, revenue spikes, the new AI rollout in Eastern Europe. It all sounded like static. He nodded when expected, scribbled half notes, but his thoughts were still in the candle-lit ballroom. Still with her. Maya. No last name, no contact. Just a few words and a smile that had taken root in the deepest, quietest part of him. Mr. Langford, said Tilda, his assistant, tapping gently on the glass. You asked for updates on the legal review with the Everson merger? Graham blinked. Right, yes, just email it to me. I'll review it later. When the meeting ended, he retreated to his office, closing the heavy door behind him. He shrugged off his suit jacket, loosened his tie, and rolled up his sleeves. Then he sat at his desk and typed the strangest Google search of his life. Maya, black woman, florist, wore a lilac apron, Grace Gold Gala, Virginia, July 27th, magnolia and moss. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And Graham Langford had built an empire from less. Later that evening, the sun dipped low behind the skyline, turning the city gold. Alan waited at the corner of Marigold and Fifth, leaning against the open passenger door of a vintage silver convertible. Not his usual car, borrowed from his brother's collection, something classic, simple, low-key. Nora emerged from the subway entrance wearing jeans, a soft yellow top, and her curls free this time, catching the breeze like a halo. She spotted him instantly, expression unreadable but not unkind. "You weren't kidding about dinner," she said, crossing the street. "I don't joke about food," Alan said with a half-smile. "Or second chances." The restaurant wasn't a five-star rooftop or some pretentious pop-up with a wait list longer than a senator's resume. It was a small Italian place tucked into the lower end of Midtown. Dim lights, red brick walls, the scent of garlic and oregano drifting out the door. Alan had eaten there once years ago. He remembered the food, but mostly the quiet. Nora raised an eyebrow as they stepped inside. "This is unexpected." "I figured you wouldn't go for foie gras and flutes of mineral water flown in from Iceland," he said. "You figured right." They sat at a booth near the window, plates of fresh pasta between them, conversation flowing more easily than either expected. He asked her about her garden, and she spoke about the joy of watching kids learn how to plant something and trust it would grow. She asked about his first app, and he told her how he built it, not for money, but out of boredom, and how now, with all the money in the world, boredom felt heavier. "Do you ever just want to walk away from all of it?" she asked. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I meet someone like you and remember why I shouldn't." Nora looked down at her fork, then back up at him. "You don't know me, Alan." "Not yet," he said, "but I'd like to." Outside, after the meal, they lingered by her subway stop. The city buzzed around them, taxis, footsteps, neon, but there was a small bubble of quiet between them. "Thanks for dinner," she said, hugging her arms. "I needed real conversation." "Me too," he said, "and I meant what I said back at the stall." "Which part?" "The part where you're hard to forget." Nora smiled, soft and unguarded. "Then maybe I'll see you again." "You will." As she descended the subway steps, she turned once. He was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her go like she was something rare. Because to him, she was. That evening, Nora closed the shop early. The sign in the window read, "Gone to rest, back tomorrow." But she didn't go home. She wandered the quiet streets with her hoodie up, hands in her pockets, trying to block out the noise that had crept into her life, the headlines, the judgment, the stares. She'd asked for none of this. One dinner, one evening with a man who saw her. And now the world wanted to tear her apart for it. At home, she silenced her phone, ignored the blinking voicemails. She didn't open the dozen missed messages from Alan, but he didn't stop trying. By noon the next day, he was outside the stall. No suit, no security, just a man in jeans and a grey crew neck, holding a bouquet of calla lilies and forget-me-nots. She spotted him from inside and froze. "Please," he said softly when she opened the door. 2 minutes. Nora nodded. "Barely." "I didn't know they'd find us. I had that place swept. No reservations, no names. I don't know how it got out." She looked away, jaw tight. "It doesn't matter." "It does. Because this is my world, and you never asked to be in it. I should have known it would follow me." A pause. "You're not the one who's paying for it, Alan," she said, voice low. "I am." His throat tightened. "Then let me help." "No." Her answer was immediate. "That's not why I sat with you that night. That's not why I agreed to dinner. I don't want your protection. I want your respect." His expression softened. "You have that. From the beginning. Then respect that I need space." He nodded slowly. "Okay." She turned to go back inside. "But Nora," he said gently. She stopped. "I'm not going to vanish just because it got hard. That's what people like Veronica expect, that I'll lose interest, that you'll walk away, but I'm not leaving unless you want me to." She hesitated, eyes closing for a breath. Then, without looking back, she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the wood, the paint peeling slightly near the hinge. Then he set the flowers down gently on the doorstep and walked away. Alan stepped out of the car, trading his leather loafers for well-worn sneakers he hadn't used in years. The sun was warm on his face, the kind of warmth you don't notice until you've spent too long inside glass towers. The garden was modest, chain-link fencing in some places, handmade planters built from salvaged wood in others. Sunflowers bowed toward the light, tomatoes ripened under mesh. Children were gathered around a woman holding a watering can, her voice low, patient, full of joy. It was her. Nora stood in the middle of it all, her hands gently guiding a young girl's as they planted a sprout together. She wore old jeans, dirt smudged across her knees, a bandana tying back her curls. Her face was bare, luminous in the afternoon sun. Alan didn't move. He didn't want to interrupt whatever sacred thing this was, this peace she'd chosen, this life she'd built outside the noise. But she looked up and saw him. Her expression didn't harden like he feared it would, but it didn't soften either. It was quiet, watchful. He stepped forward carefully. "I didn't come here to change your mind," he said, stopping just short of the garden bed. "I came to understand it." A pause. Nora handed off the watering can to another volunteer and walked toward him slowly. "You tracked me down again." "I didn't send press this time," he said with a faint smile. "No cameras, no flowers, just me." She glanced down at his shoes, then back at him. "Those look like they've never touched dirt in their life." "I'm working on it." A beat passed, and then another. Finally, she nodded toward the patch of soil behind her. "If you really want to understand, grab a trowel." He didn't hesitate. They knelt side by side in the dirt, planting basil and peppers under the wide, open sky. Children giggled nearby. A sprinkler sputtered to life, and Alan, billionaire, mogul, man who hadn't touched soil since summer camp, dug his hands into the earth without complaint. "You were right, you know," Nora said softly after a long silence. "I do want peace, but I don't want to live afraid either." He looked over at her, eyes steady. "You don't have to be afraid with me. I don't want promises you can't keep." "I'm not offering a promise," he said. "I'm offering presence. Wherever you are, that's where I want to be, even if it means kneeling in a garden every Saturday." She smiled then, really smiled, and it hit him like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. "You sure about that?" she asked. "More sure than I've ever been about anything." And for the first time in weeks, Nora didn't feel like she was part of a headline. She felt seen. She felt safe. And as the sun dipped lower behind the trees, two people sat in the soil. No press, no pressure, just something beginning again, quietly and honestly. Nora froze. The screen in the cafe flickered slightly as Alan stood on that stage, surrounded by towering minds and million-dollar suits, but everything about him looked grounded, real. As if for once, he wasn't performing for shareholders or headlines or legacy. He was speaking for her. "She doesn't live in a penthouse," he continued, voice steady, calm and sure. "She doesn't have millions in funding or the right name in the right circles, but she has grace, integrity, the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need a spotlight to shine." The audience was dead silent now. "She reminded me that success means nothing if it costs you connection, that peace is not a weakness, that love, real love, doesn't demand spectacle. It grows in gardens, in small moments, in truth." Nora set her cup down slowly, barely noticing that her fingers trembled. "I was given this platform," Alan said, gesturing around the massive auditorium. "But today I'm giving it back, at least for this moment, because the most important thing I've built recently wasn't a company, it was a conversation, and I'm not done having it." He looked straight into the camera, not at the press, not at the world, at her. "If you're watching," he said, "I see you, Nora Kings. And I'm not asking for headlines or forgiveness. I'm just hoping for one more chance to listen. Then, without fanfare or applause, he stepped away from the podium. Back in the cafe, Nora sat motionless, heart hammering against her ribs. People clapped politely on the screen, unsure of what had just happened, but she knew. It wasn't a stunt, it wasn't a grand gesture born out of ego, it was real. It was him, choosing her, not in private, but in front of the very world that tried to chew her up. Mrs. Marigold's words echoed back in her head. Do something that shows her you see her. He had. And now, for the first time in weeks, Nora smiled. A month later, Alan hosted a press conference, not in the usual marble hall, not in a luxury hotel ballroom lined with gold-trimmed chairs and velvet ropes. This one was held outdoors, under the arching branches of a blooming magnolia tree, in the very community garden where it all began. Folding chairs, lemonade pitchers, and flower beds as the backdrop. There was no podium, just Alan, in rolled sleeves and weathered boots, standing in the dirt with Nora beside him, hand in hand. The press was already buzzing. Speculation ran wild. Was this a brand move, a soft rebrand, a romantic stunt? Alan stepped forward and held up a hand. No questions today, he said calmly. Just truth. The cameras clicked, but he didn't flinch. A while ago I stood in front of the world and talked about what I'd built, what I'd achieved. But what I didn't say was how easy it is to lose sight of what matters when you're surrounded by noise. He turned slightly, glancing at Nora, who gave him a small nod. I was used to winning, but it took losing Nora to understand the difference between winning and deserving, between noise and love. He looked out at the crowd again. So, this isn't a press announcement. It's not a merger or a launch. It's a thank you to the woman who made me see clearly. And to anyone out there, afraid they don't belong in a world that moves too fast, you do. The right people will slow down for you. Nora squeezed his hand, eyes misty but steady. Someone shouted, Is she moving in with you? Alan smiled. No, I'm spending more time here. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but his expression was serious. Peace doesn't come from penthouses. It comes from growing roots somewhere real. Nora stepped forward, surprising even the reporters. I didn't want to be a symbol. I didn't want to be a scandal. I just wanted to be seen without having to shout for it. She glanced at Alan. And I was, loud and clear. The applause started slow, unsure, but it built. Not out of politeness, but from people who recognized something rare when they saw it. That night, Nora returned to her stall, only to find a small crowd of neighbors waiting. One brought muffins, another offered to help repaint her sign. An older woman handed her a card that read, Thank you for reminding us that real love doesn't need to be loud, just honest. Inside the stall, tucked between a vase of eucalyptus and sunflowers, was a handwritten note from Alan. I'll see you at the garden, same time always. Aye. She smiled and pressed it to her chest, because in the end, it wasn't the spotlight that had changed everything. It was the man who stepped out of it to stand beside her. 3 years later, the Bloom project had expanded to 5 cities. Nora stood in the center of their newest garden, her hands dusted with soil, her heart fuller than it had ever been. She'd just finished helping a young woman name her very first flower arrangement, Second Chances. It was made of soft pink peonies, white lilacs, and one bold red poppy in the middle. That name felt right. Across the garden, Alan was kneeling beside a little boy, showing him how to plant lavender seeds. The boy's mother, a former Bloom mentee, watched from the side, her eyes grateful. Nora took a quiet photo. No headlines, no flash. Just her husband in the dirt where growth begins. Their wedding had been small, a vineyard chapel in the hills of Florence, the scent of lemon blossoms drifting on the breeze. She walked barefoot. He cried openly. No magazines were invited. Just real people, real joy. They split their time now between a brownstone in the city and a cottage near the coast. She kept her flower stall, smaller now, symbolic, and he took fewer meetings, building fewer things and living more. They still danced in socks, still argued about book arrangements, still had picnics where he forgot the napkins and she forgave him instantly. And every Sunday morning, they gardened together. Not because the world needed more flowers, but because it reminded them, love is grown, not found. And in their quiet, blooming corner of the world, they were everything but ordinary. That final smile, the one that started it all, had never lost its power. Years from now, when they'd have streaks of grey in their hair and laugh lines carved deep from a life well loved, they'd sit on their porch, flowers blooming around them, sipping tea or coffee, his still brewed too strong, and Alan would look at her the same way he always had, as if she were the first and only miracle he'd ever witnessed. And Nora would still smile like light breaking through a storm, the way she had that very first night in the quiet restaurant, in that sage green dress when he realized small talk wasn't necessary for something that already felt infinite. Theirs was never the loud kind of love. It didn't trend. It didn't sell headlines, but it grew wildly, bravely, like a garden that refused to be tamed, and that was enough. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Let's keep growing.